When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I still remember that moment clearly. Not because of what she said, but because of how quiet everything became right after. The kitchen clock was ticking. The refrigerator hummed softly. Outside, a car passed by, and then there was nothing but silence. I stood there with my hands folded in front of me, nodding as if I understood. As if my heart had not just cracked open. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't remind her whose house it once was, or how many years I had spent holding that family together with tired hands and quiet sacrifices. I simply smiled. Later, when I was alone in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe normally. I told myself not to make a sound. I told myself that crying would only make it real. But it was already real. I had raised my son in that house. I had watched him take his first steps in the hallway. I had stood at that same kitchen counter, helping him with homework while dinner cooked on the stove. And now I was being asked to leave it behind. Not by him. Not directly. But by the woman he loved. Her name was Emily. And the lie she told would change everything. I want to tell this story slowly. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is heavy. And heavy stories deserve time. People think family conflicts happen with loud voices and slammed doors. But this one didn't. It happened quietly. Polite words. Careful smiles. And one lie that slipped into the space between us and stayed there, growing larger every day. I am telling this now because I carried it for too long. And because maybe someone listening will recognize the silence I lived in. My name is Margaret. I am a mother. And I am a woman who once believed that love, if given patiently, would always be enough. I was wrong about that. But I did not know it then. Back then, I still believed in keeping peace at all costs. I believed in swallowing hurt so others could feel comfortable. I believed that if I stayed quiet, things would settle on their own. That belief would cost me my home. The day Emily asked me to leave, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult me. She didn't even look angry. She stood near the kitchen sink, drying a plate slowly, carefully. Her movements were calm, like she had practiced this moment in her head many times. "Margaret," she said softly, "I think we need to talk." Those words are never harmless. They always mean something is already decided. I nodded and sat down at the table. The same table where we had eaten so many family dinners. The same table where I had once held my son's hand while he told me he was in love with her. Emily took a deep breath. She looked tired. Or maybe she wanted me to think she was. "I've been feeling really uncomfortable lately," she said. "I don't think this living arrangement is healthy anymore." I waited. I let the silence stretch. Because mothers learn early that silence often speaks louder than words. She continued. "I feel like there's tension, and I don't want it to affect my marriage." "My marriage," she said. "Not our family." I nodded again. Slowly. She went on, choosing each word like it mattered deeply. "I think it might be best if you stayed somewhere else for a while." For a while. That phrase is gentle on the surface, but it has sharp edges underneath. I asked only one question. "Did your husband say this?" She paused. Just for a moment. And in that pause, something shifted. "Yes," she said. "We talked about it together." That was the lie. But I didn't know it yet. I smiled at her then. I even thanked her for being honest. I told her I understood. That young couples needed space. That I didn't want to be a burden. She relaxed when I said that. I could see it in her shoulders. In the way she exhaled. She had expected resistance. Or maybe tears. She got neither. And because of that, she believed she had one quietly. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe around me. The soft creaks of the floor, the distant sound of a television in their bedroom. My son, Daniel, was down the hall, close enough that I could picture him clearly. I wondered if he knew, if he understood what was happening. I wondered if he remembered the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the years I worked extra hours to keep that house running, the way I had stepped back when he got married, careful not to interfere. I wondered when I had become something that needed to be removed. This didn't happen overnight. That is important to understand. The lie did not fall from the sky. It was built slowly, piece by piece, inside small moments that seemed harmless at the time. And to understand how we got there, I need to go back. Back to when Emily first entered our lives. I met Emily on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel brought her home for lunch. She was polite, well-spoken. She smiled often, but not too much. I remember thinking she was careful, like someone who measured every step before taking it. She complimented the house, asked about my work, helped clear the dishes without being asked. I liked her. Truly. When Daniel looked at her, his eyes softened in a way I had not seen since he was a child. And that mattered to me. I wanted him happy. I wanted him loved. So I welcomed her. When they married, they moved into the house with me. It made sense financially. The house was large, and I was still working, still independent. We agreed it would be temporary. A few years, maybe. I promised myself I would not interfere, that I would give them space. And I did. I stayed in my lane. I cooked when asked. I stayed quiet when I felt something was off. I told myself this was what support looked like. But something changed after the wedding. Not dramatically, just enough to feel. Emily became distant. Not unkind. Just controlled. She corrected small things. How I folded towels. Where I placed dishes. What time I used the kitchen. Always politely. Always with a smile. And I adjusted. Again and again. Because that is what I had always done. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. He was busy. Working long hours. Building a future. I told myself this was normal. That marriage shifted dynamics. I told myself to be patient. The first time I felt truly out of place was at a family dinner. Emily had invited her parents. I helped prepare the meal. I stayed quiet during conversation. At one point, her mother turned to Emily and said, "It must be so hard sharing a house." Emily laughed softly. "It has its challenges," she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. No one noticed. But I did. That night, I sat alone and tried to name the feeling inside me. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was displacement. Like slowly being erased from a space I once filled naturally. And then came the comments. Small ones. "We should really have more privacy. I think couples need their own routines. It's hard to feel like this is fully our home." Always said gently. Always framed as feelings, not accusations. And always said when Daniel wasn't around. I started doubting myself. Wondering if I was doing something wrong without realizing it. I apologized often. For things no one asked me to apologize for. Emily accepted those apologies with calm nods. And slowly, she built the story. That I was intrusive. That I was causing tension. That I was affecting their marriage. By the time she told me to leave, the groundwork was already laid. All she needed was one final piece. The lie that said, "Your son agrees." I packed my things quietly over the next few days. Daniel was away on a business trip. Emily offered help, but I declined. I didn't trust my voice to stay steady. Each drawer I opened held memories. Each object felt heavier than it should. I realized then how deeply rooted I was in that house, and how easily roots can be pulled when no one protects them. When Daniel returned, I was already gone. And that is where this story truly begins. When Daniel came back from his trip, I was already staying in a small rented room across town. It wasn't far, but it felt like another world. The room had a narrow bed, a single window, and walls that looked like they had listened to too many lonely stories before mine. I chose it because it was quiet. I told myself quiet would help me think. That evening, my phone rang. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said. His voice sounded confused. Not angry. Not upset. Just confused. "Why aren't you home?" That word. Home. I closed my eyes before answering. I needed to keep my voice steady. "Emily talked to me," I said gently. "She said you both thought it would be better if I stayed somewhere else for a while." There was a long pause. So long, I thought the call had dropped. "What?" he finally said. And in that single word, I understood everything. Daniel had not known. He had not agreed. He had not been part of that conversation at all. My chest tightened, but I kept my voice calm. I had spent my life learning how to soften hard truths. "She said you talked about it," I added carefully. Another pause. Then a quiet breath on the other end of the line. "Mom, I didn't say that." I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight. "Oh," I said. "Just that." "Oh." Daniel came to see me the next day. He looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. He sat across from me in that small room, his knees pulled close, his hands folded the way they used to be when he was nervous as a child. "I don't understand how this happened," he said. "I knew things were tense sometimes, but I never wanted you to leave." I nodded. I didn't want to place a weight on him that he wasn't ready to carry. "It's all right," I said softly. "I don't want to cause problems between you and your wife." He looked up quickly. "Mom, this is a problem." I smiled gently, the way mothers do when they are trying to protect their children from storms they themselves are already standing in. "Marriage is complicated," I said. "You'll understand more as time goes on." That was the moment I chose silence over truth. And that choice would shape everything that followed. Daniel talked to Emily that night. I know because he told me later. He said she cried. He said she felt overwhelmed. That she felt watched. That she felt judged. "She said she never meant to hurt you," he explained. I listened without interrupting. "She said she thought it would be easier if you heard it from her," he added. Easier for whom, I wondered. But I didn't say it. After that, things changed, but not in the way I had hoped. Daniel started visiting me more often. Emily became distant. Polite but cold. And the lie stayed exactly where it was. Unspoken. Unchallenged. Because I didn't expose it. People often think lies collapse on their own. That the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light. But some lies don't need defending. They survive on silence. And I was very good at being silent. I told myself I was doing the right thing. That confronting Emily would only create more tension. That Daniel deserved peace in his marriage. I told myself love meant stepping back. What I didn't understand yet was that stepping back can sometimes look like admitting guilt you never had. Emily began rewriting the story slowly. When Daniel visited me, she would text him. Small messages. "Hope everything's okay. Just feeling a little anxious tonight." Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But enough to pull his attention back toward her. I never complained. I never asked him to stay longer. I watched him glance at his phone, his smile fading just a little each time. Eventually, visits became shorter. Once a week. Then once every 2 weeks. Life filled the space. It always does. The house I once lived in became their house. I stopped referring to it as mine, even in my thoughts. When I went back to pick up a few remaining things, Emily greeted me like a guest. "Let me know if you need anything," she said politely. Her tone was smooth, controlled. She stood slightly angled away from me, as if already preparing for my exit. I moved through the rooms carefully, like someone walking through a memory rather than a place. Nothing looked different, but everything felt unfamiliar. I realized then that the lie had already done its work. Emily didn't need Daniel to believe I was wrong. She only needed him to believe she was fragile. And I had helped her do that. Months passed. I found a small apartment of my own. I adjusted to quiet evenings and cooking for one. I told friends I was fine. And mostly I was. But there were moments when loneliness arrived without warning. In the grocery store, at a family table on holidays. Moments when I wondered if my son thought I had chosen distance. One evening, Daniel called unexpectedly. "Mom," he said, "do you ever feel like something's wrong but you can't name it?" I closed my eyes. "Yes," I said. "All the time." There was something heavy in his silence. "I feel like I'm always choosing," he said quietly. "And no matter what I choose, someone is disappointed." I wanted to tell him everything then. I wanted to tell him about the pause before Emily answered my question. About the certainty I felt afterward. But I didn't. I told him something safer. "You're doing the best you can," I said. "And sometimes that has to be enough." Emily announced her pregnancy not long after. Daniel was overjoyed. I was happy for them. Truly. But the news changed everything again. Emily became the center of every conversation, every concern, every plan, and I faded further into the background. She called me once. Her voice was softer than it had been in months. "I hope you know I never wanted things to be this way," she said. I listened. "I just needed space," she added. Space. Such a gentle word for such a permanent distance. "I understand," I replied. And I did. I understood exactly how carefully this had all been managed. The baby arrived in the spring. A little boy. Daniel asked me to come to the hospital. I stood in the doorway of that bright room, watching Emily hold her son. She looked peaceful, complete. Daniel smiled at me. "Mom," he said, "meet your grandson." I stepped forward, my heart full and aching at the same time. Emily handed him to me carefully. Her hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary. I held him gently, afraid my emotions would wake him. In that moment, I knew something with quiet certainty. This child would grow up hearing a version of me that I did not recognize. Emily watched me closely after that. Not with hostility. With caution. As if I were something that needed managing. She limited visits. Controlled timing. Set boundaries that always sounded reasonable. And Daniel went along with them. Because they were presented as protection. Not exclusion. The lie had grown roots. And I was standing on the outside of something I once belonged to completely. I started writing letters I never sent. Long ones. Careful ones. Letters where I told the truth in calm words. Letters where I explained how silence had become my language. I kept them in a drawer. Because part of me still believed patience would fix everything. But patience, I would learn, does not undo manipulation. It only gives it time to settle. The moment that changed everything came quietly. Not in anger. Not in conflict. Just a sentence spoken casually. And when I heard it, I finally understood how far the lie had traveled. That is where I will continue. The sentence that changed everything was spoken without care. That was the strange part. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't said in anger. It didn't come with tears or raised voices. It was casual, almost careless. And yet, it landed heavier than anything that had come before it. It happened on a quiet afternoon when Daniel invited me over to their house. I hadn't been there in weeks. Emily said she was tired. The baby had been fussy. But that day, Daniel insisted. "Mom, please come," he said. "I want us all to sit together for a bit." I hesitated before agreeing. I had learned not to assume invitations meant welcome. But something in his voice felt different. He sounded unsettled. The house smelled the same as it always had. Clean. Familiar. But it no longer felt like it remembered me. Emily was in the living room, rocking the baby gently. She smiled when she saw me. A practiced smile. "Hi, Margaret," she said. Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed, staring outside. We sat down. The baby slept between us, breathing softly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Emily said it. "I've really tried to move past what happened before," she said calmly. "But sometimes it still affects me." Daniel turned toward her. "What do you mean?" he asked. She sighed, as if tired from carrying something too long. "The pressure," she said. "The tension when your mom lived here." I felt my chest tighten, but I stayed still. Daniel frowned. "You mean before Mom moved out?" Emily nodded. "You remember how difficult it was," she continued. "How uncomfortable I felt." Daniel looked confused. "I knew you wanted space," he said slowly. "But I didn't realize it was that bad." Emily glanced at me, then back at him. "I didn't want to tell you everything," she said softly. "I didn't want to hurt your relationship with your mom." There it was. The final version of the lie. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not shock. Clarity. For the first time, I saw the full picture. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about control. And it had worked because I had allowed it to. Daniel turned to me. "Mom," he asked, "was it really that tense for you too?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I could still choose silence. I had chosen it many times before. But this time, something felt different. I looked at my grandson sleeping peacefully. I looked at my son, whose eyes carried confusion and guilt. And I realized something with painful clarity. If I stayed silent now, the lie would become truth. Not just for Daniel, but for the child growing up in this house. I took a slow breath. "No," I said quietly. Emily stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "No," Daniel repeated. "It wasn't tense for me," I said gently. "It was confusing and hurtful, but not tense." Emily's smile faded slightly. "Margaret," she said, "I don't think this is the right time." "I'm not accusing you," I interrupted softly. "I'm explaining." Daniel looked between us. "Explaining what?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them steady. "The day I moved out," I said, "Emily told me you both had agreed it was best." Daniel's head snapped up. "I never said that," he said quickly. "I know," I replied. The room went very quiet. Emily's breathing changed. Just slightly. I asked her directly. I continued calmly. "I asked if you knew. She said yes." Daniel turned to Emily. "Is that true?" he asked. She hesitated. Just for a moment. But that moment was enough. "I didn't mean it that way," she said. "I assumed you would agree." "That's not the same thing," Daniel replied. His voice was still calm, but something had hardened underneath it. "I didn't think it would matter," she said quickly. "You were so busy. I was overwhelmed. I thought it would be easier if it came from me." Easier. That word again. Daniel stood up and began packing slowly. "So you told my mom I wanted her gone," he said quietly. "I didn't say gone," Emily replied. But that's what happened, he said. The baby stirred slightly, then settled again. I felt tears rise, but I didn't let them fall. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about truth. Emily looked at me then. Really looked at me. I never thought you'd say anything, she said. Her voice wasn't angry. It was surprised. And that hurt more than anything else. Daniel stopped packing. You assumed my silence meant consent, he said. Emily shook her head. I assumed your mom understood, she replied. I did understand, I said softly. I understood you wanted me out. She looked down. The truth settled into the room like heavy air. No one rushed to fill the silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Mom? I swallowed. Because I didn't want to be the reason your marriage struggled, I said. And because I thought being patient would make things better. Did it? He asked. I shook my head slowly. No. That night, Daniel asked me to stay for dinner. Emily barely spoke. The meal passed quietly. Polite. But something fundamental had changed. The lie was no longer protected. Over the next few weeks, conversations happened that should have happened much earlier. Daniel asked questions. Emily gave answers. Some were honest. Some were carefully framed. But the tone was different now. Daniel listened more closely. He noticed patterns he had missed before. Who spoke for whom? Who controlled decisions? Emily grew defensive. Not loudly, but with distance. She accused Daniel of taking sides, of not supporting her. I just wanted our own space, she said repeatedly. I never thought it would turn into this, but it already had. One evening, Daniel came to my apartment alone. He sat at my small table, staring at his hands. I don't know what to do, he admitted. I poured tea for both of us. You don't have to choose, I said. But I already did, he replied. I didn't argue. I feel like I've been living in a story that wasn't fully true, he said. And now I don't know where the truth ends. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. The truth doesn't shout, I said. It waits. Emily stopped calling me after that. Visits became awkward. Short. She watched every interaction closely. I saw fear in her eyes now. Not hatred. Fear of losing control. The turning point came one afternoon when Daniel called me unexpectedly. Mom, he said, did you ever feel like you had to apologize just to keep peace? I closed my eyes. Yes, I answered. So did I, he said quietly. That was when I knew the lie had finally reached its limit. And what came next would decide everything. The weeks after that conversation felt like walking through a house after a storm. Nothing was broken in obvious ways. The walls were still standing. The furniture was still in place. But everything felt shifted. Daniel didn't say much when he came to see me after that phone call. He didn't need to. I could see it in his eyes. He was finally seeing the shape of things as they truly were. Not just the lie itself, but the space it had created. The quiet distance. The careful words. The way everyone had been tiptoeing around the truth for so long that it had begun to feel dangerous to speak it out loud. One evening, Daniel arrived at my apartment with his shoulders slumped and his face tired in a way I hadn't seen before. This wasn't the tiredness of long workdays. It was the kind that settles into a person when they've been carrying conflicting loyalties for too long. He sat down heavily on the chair near the window. The light from outside softened his face. I talked to Emily, he said quietly. I waited. I had learned not to rush moments like this. She admits she shouldn't have said I agreed, he continued. She says she panicked, that she felt overwhelmed and alone. I nodded. She says she never thought it would go this far. That sentence sat between us for a long time. I believe she didn't plan all of it, I said slowly. But intentions don't erase impact. Daniel let out a long breath. I don't know how I didn't see it sooner, he said. I thought I was keeping the peace, but really, I was avoiding discomfort. I smiled faintly. That's something many people confuse, I replied. He stayed quiet for a moment, then asked the question I had been expecting. Why didn't you tell me earlier, Mom? I looked down at my hands. The skin had grown thinner with time. The veins more visible. Because I raised you to build a life of your own, I said. And I was afraid that telling the truth would make me look like I was trying to pull you back. He shook his head slowly. You were protecting me, he said. I was protecting everyone, I replied gently. But sometimes protection becomes silence, and silence can be dangerous. Emily didn't speak to me for weeks after that. Not a message. Not a call. Daniel said she needed time. I understood that. But I also understood something else. For the first time, I was no longer waiting for her comfort to matter more than my truth. When Emily finally did call, her voice was quieter than I remembered. Less controlled. I don't know how to fix this, she said. I sat at my kitchen table, the phone resting lightly in my hand. You can't fix what you won't name, I replied calmly. There was a pause. I felt like I was losing control of my own life, she admitted. And I blamed you for that. I didn't interrupt. I didn't think you'd leave without talking to Daniel, she continued. I didn't think you'd actually go. I closed my eyes. That's the part you don't understand, I said softly. When a mother is told she's unwanted, she doesn't fight. She steps back because she believes that's love. Emily didn't respond right away. I'm sorry, she said eventually. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. Things didn't magically become easy after that. Real life rarely works that way. Emily was cautious. So was I. Trust doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds slowly, if it rebuilds at all. Daniel started coming to see me more often. Not out of guilt. Out of intention. We talked about ordinary things. Work. Weather. Small memories from his childhood. Sometimes we sat in silence. And for the first time in a long time, that silence felt safe. One afternoon, Daniel brought my grandson over alone. He was older now. More alert. He reached for my finger and held it tightly. I felt something settle inside my chest. Not pain. Not regret. Peace. Emily joined us later that day. She stood in the doorway for a moment before coming in. I wasn't sure if you wanted me here, she said quietly. I want honesty here, I replied. That's all. She nodded. We sat together at the table. 3 adults. 1 child. No raised voices. No accusations. Just careful words and long pauses. Emily spoke about how overwhelmed she had felt after the wedding. How sharing space made her feel like she was never fully settled. I listened. Then I spoke about how displacement feels when it comes quietly. How easily gratitude can be mistaken for weakness. Daniel listened to both of us. And for the first time, he didn't try to smooth things over. He didn't rush us toward resolution. He let the truth exist, exactly as it was. After that day, something changed. Not dramatically, but steadily. Emily stopped speaking for Daniel. Daniel stopped assuming silence meant agreement. And I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I did not move back into the house. That chapter had closed. But I was no longer erased from it. Time passed. Holidays came and went. Some were awkward. Some were warm. All were honest. One evening, long after the baby had fallen asleep, Emily stayed behind after Daniel left the room. I want you to know something, she said. I didn't think you'd survive leaving like that. I thought you'd come back, or fight. I met her eyes. I survived because I had already spent years learning how to be quiet, I said. What I'm learning now is how to speak. She nodded slowly. I no longer tell this story with bitterness. Bitterness would give it more power than it deserves. I tell it with clarity. Because this is not just a story about a lie. It's a story about what happens when kindness is mistaken for permission. When patience is mistaken for guilt. When silence is mistaken for consent. I think often about that day in the kitchen. The ticking clock. The quiet hum of the refrigerator. If I could speak to that version of myself now, I wouldn't tell her to fight harder. I wouldn't tell her to shout or accuse. I would tell her this. Your truth does not make you difficult. Your presence does not make you a burden. And your silence is not your responsibility to maintain. Today, my life is smaller. Quieter. But it is mine. I drink my tea slowly. I read in the evenings. I speak when something matters. And when my grandson laughs, I let myself believe that the future does not have to repeat the past. Families are not broken by truth. They are broken by the fear of it. And sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is stop smiling through the pain and allow herself to be seen.